She thought she would marry a paralyzed billionaire. But on wedding night, everything changed. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. On a quiet evening in a small town, Emily Harper sat at the worn wooden table of her family's modest kitchen. Her younger brother's medical bills had stacked high, envelopes marked with bold red letters screaming overdue. Her mother's eyes carried the weight of years of sacrifice, and Emily knew she could no longer delay a decision that could change her life forever. That decision came in the form of a thick envelope delivered by a sleek black car parked outside their crumbling house. Inside was a contract, a marriage contract. The name at the top was one everyone in the state knew: Alexander Sterling. He was a billionaire, heir to the Sterling Group, a dynasty that ruled industries from banking to real estate. Yet whispers followed his name. They said he had been paralyzed after a terrible accident. They said he lived in a mansion overlooking the city, unable to walk, dependent on a wheelchair, hidden from society's judgmental eyes. Emily's hands trembled as she held the papers. Her family's debts could vanish with her signature. Her brother could receive the treatment he needed. But the price was her freedom, her future, and her heart. She would be bound to a man she had never met, a man who might never even look at her as a wife. When the day of the wedding arrived, the church was filled with opulence, though the ceremony lacked warmth. Golden chandeliers sparkled, a string quartet played softly, but the guests whispered behind lace fans and polished shoes. "She is marrying for money," some sneered. "He is desperate to secure his fortune," others said. Emily wore a simple gown, chosen not for style but for affordability. Her hands clutched the bouquet so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. She forced herself to look at Alexander, seated in a wheelchair at the altar. His face was sharp, aristocratic, unreadable. He gave her no smile, no sign of kindness. Only a gaze that seemed to study her every move. The vows were exchanged in measured tones, almost mechanical. The ring, heavy with diamonds, slid onto her finger. Applause echoed, hollow and cold. Emily felt as if she had stepped into a golden cage, the door closing behind her. That night, as the newlyweds entered the vast Sterling mansion, Emily braced herself for a lifetime of cold duty. The house loomed like a fortress, its marble halls echoing with silence. Servants bowed, but their eyes judged. She was shown to a bedroom gilded in silver and glass, prepared for her arrival. She expected Alexander to retreat to his own chambers, distant and unreachable. But when the door closed and the night grew quiet, something happened that shattered every assumption Emily had carried into this marriage. Alexander, the man the world believed to be paralyzed, rose slowly from his chair. His legs moved with steady strength, his posture tall and commanding. The wheelchair stood empty, a silent witness to the deception that had ensnared them both. Emily's heart raced, her breath caught in her throat. This was not the life she had prepared for. This was not the husband she thought she had married. And in that charged silence, with shadows dancing across the walls of the mansion, Emily realized her story had only just begun. The silence in the Sterling mansion that night was heavy, like a weight pressing against Emily's chest. The image of Alexander standing on his own feet replayed in her mind again and again. Her heart still raced with disbelief, fear, and a quiet fury. Why had he pretended? Why had the world been led to believe he was bound to a wheelchair, while in truth he could walk with ease? The next morning, sunlight poured through tall windows framed by velvet curtains. Emily sat at the breakfast table, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of a porcelain cup. Alexander entered the dining hall with a measured stride, his presence filling the vast room. There was no wheelchair in sight. The staff kept their eyes lowered, as if they had been trained for years never to betray their master's secrets. Emily's voice trembled but held determination. "You lied to me. You let everyone think you were paralyzed. Why? Why would you marry me under false pretenses?" Alexander did not flinch. His gaze was steady, cold, but beneath it lingered something unreadable. You signed the contract knowing nothing about me. You did it for your family. I did it for mine. We both had our reasons." "Oh?" His words cut deep. Emily felt her chest tighten with anger. "You humiliated me before the world. You let me walk into this marriage believing a lie. Do you understand what that means?" Alexander leaned forward slightly, his voice low, carrying the weight of command. "It means you are bound to me. And it means you are stronger than the whispers of society. That is what I needed to see." Her eyes widened. Was this all a test? Was she nothing more than a pawn in his game to measure loyalty, resilience, or perhaps her desperation? The sting of betrayal burned, but Emily held her ground. That afternoon, the two of them were forced to appear together at a charity gala hosted by the Sterling Foundation. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, gowns, and jewels, but the air was thick with judgment. Murmurs followed Emily wherever she went. "She is the poor girl who married him for his money," a woman whispered. "He must be desperate to marry someone like her," another man smirked. Emily felt every word like a blade cutting into her dignity. She stood tall, chin lifted, forcing herself not to break. Alexander, however, remained distant, offering her no comfort. His expression stayed unreadable, a mask that revealed nothing. When a former business rival approached with a mocking smile, the cruelty sharpened. "Mrs. Sterling," he said loudly enough for others to hear, "do you find it difficult, caring for a husband who cannot even walk? Or has he already taught you how to push the chair?" The laughter around them was sharp and merciless. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. She looked at Alexander, waiting, hoping he would say something, anything, to defend her. But he only stared, his jaw tight, his hands folded calmly. Anger surged within her. She met the rival's sneer with a steady gaze. "My husband's strength is not measured by his legs. It is measured by his will and his achievements. Things none of you here could ever match." Her voice rang clear, silencing the room for a moment. The rival's smirk faltered, but the damage was done. Emily knew the whispers would not stop. She also knew that Alexander had allowed her to stand alone, to fight her own battle, before a sea of watching eyes. That night, as the car carried them back to the mansion, Emily turned to him, her voice raw. "You could have defended me. Instead, you let them humiliate me. Why?" Alexander's eyes flickered, his tone calm but edged with steel. "Because I needed to see how you would defend yourself. The world will never stop attacking. I will not always be there to shield you." Her chest ached, caught between admiration for his ruthless honesty and resentment for his cold detachment. She pressed her lips together, staring out at the darkened city lights beyond the window. In that silence, Emily realized this marriage was not just a contract. It was a battlefield, and she would need every ounce of strength to survive it. Days in the Sterling mansion unfolded like chapters in a book Emily had never meant to read. The vast halls were lined with portraits of ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow her every step, as if judging whether she belonged. Servants moved silently, efficient and discreet, yet she could feel their curiosity lingering in the air. Every morning, Emily and Alexander sat together at the long mahogany dining table. The food was lavish, served on gold-rimmed china, but the silence was heavier than any luxury. Alexander spoke little, his eyes hidden behind a wall of calculation. He observed her, measured her, as though waiting for her to falter. Despite his coldness, small moments of forced intimacy began to creep into their lives. One evening, Emily entered the library to find Alexander standing by the fire, a glass of brandy in his hand. He looked at her with quiet challenge. "Do you read?" he asked simply. She hesitated. "Yes. I used to borrow books from the town library whenever I could. Mostly classics. Jane Austen, Charles Dickens." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly hidden. He handed her a leather-bound volume. "Then prove it. Read aloud." Emily opened the book, her voice trembling at first, then steadying as the words filled the room. For the first time, Alexander listened without interruption, his gaze fixed on her as the flames cast shifting shadows across his face. The silence that followed was different, not heavy with hostility, but with something unspoken, something neither dared to name. The next morning, Alexander's health seemed to falter. Though he had stood strong the night of their wedding, he occasionally returned to the wheelchair, claiming fatigue. Emily found herself instinctively moving to help him. She adjusted his blanket, poured him water, and prepared his medication. Her hands were gentle, her eyes sincere. "You do not need to do that," he muttered, almost annoyed. "I know," she replied softly. "But I want to." Her words unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He turned away, but in that moment, a fracture formed in the wall he had built around himself. Later that week, during a dinner with extended family, the atmosphere grew tense. Alexander's cousin, a sharp-eyed man named Richard, eyed Emily with thinly veiled disdain. "It is remarkable," Richard said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "how quickly some people can adapt to wealth. From a small-town kitchen to the sterling dining room in just a matter of weeks." Emily's cheeks burned, but before she could respond, Alexander set his glass down with a deliberate thud. "That is enough," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Emily is my wife. Show her the respect she deserves." The room fell silent. For the first time, Alexander had defended her openly. Emily's heart leapt, though her expression remained composed. It was a small crack in his armor, but it was real. That night, back in the mansion, Emily confronted him quietly. "Why did you speak up for me today?" Alexander's eyes softened for a fleeting second before the mask returned. "Because respect is not optional, and because you stood for me when others mocked. It was my turn." Emily turned away, her lips curving into a faint, private smile. For the first time, she sensed that beneath his cold exterior, Alexander was beginning to see her not as a pawn in a contract, but as something more. As the days went on, routines bound them closer. They passed each other in hallways, shared meals, exchanged glances that carried more weight than words. Though the mansion remained vast and imposing, Emily began to carve small spaces of warmth within it. A vase of fresh flowers in the kitchen, a favorite book left open on the study desk. A melody hummed softly as she moved through the halls. And though Alexander never admitted it aloud, these quiet touches unsettled him. They chipped away at his solitude, forcing him to reckon with a truth he had long buried. That companionship, even in the form of a contract marriage, could awaken something dangerously close to longing. Emily, too, felt the shift. She had entered this marriage out of duty, out of desperation. But now, each accidental brush of his hand, each unspoken word, each lingering look carved itself into her heart, leaving marks she could no longer deny. The battle between them was not just in words or silence. It was now in the fragile, undeniable bond growing in the shadows of the mansion. The weeks that followed unfolded with a strange rhythm, as though Emily and Alexander had entered an uneasy truce. They lived under the same roof, moved through the same routines, and yet an invisible line remained drawn between them. But lines, no matter how firmly marked, often blur when life forces two people together. One stormy evening, Alexander returned home later than usual. His face was pale, his movements heavier than normal, and a faint tremor shook his hands. Emily noticed at once. Without a word, she hurried to his side. "You are burning up," she whispered, pressing her palm against his forehead. His skin was hot, his breathing shallow. Alexander tried to brush her off. "It is nothing. I am fine." But Emily refused to move aside. She guided him gently into a chair, fetched a damp cloth, and placed it against his brow. "You push yourself too hard," she said softly. Her voice filled with quiet reproach. "Even the strongest men need care." Her touch, tender and unassuming, pierced through his defenses. For the first time, he allowed someone to tend to him without protest. His eyes lingered on her face as she prepared medicine, her brow furrowed in concentration. In that moment, he saw not a contract bride, not a pawn in a game of power, but a woman whose compassion was genuine. Later that night, when the fever had eased, Alexander caught her hand as she rose to leave. His grip was weak but steady. "Why do you do this?" he asked, his voice rough. Emily looked at him in silence, then answered with simple honesty. "Because it is the right thing to do. You may not trust me yet, but I will never turn my back on someone who needs me." Her words struck him deeper than he wanted to admit. That night, long after she had gone, he stared into the shadows of his room, replaying her voice in his mind. The following weekend, the Sterlings attended a public event at the art museum. Emily, dressed in an elegant gown chosen by the house staff, walked beside Alexander, their presence turning heads. Once again, whispers filled the room. Some admired her courage, others sneered at her origins. During the evening, a wealthy socialite approached Emily with a smile sharp as glass. "Tell me, Mrs. Sterling," she said, her tone laced with mockery, "do you enjoy being the charity project of this family? It must be quite the achievement for a girl like you." Emily's cheeks burned, but before she could respond, Alexander stepped forward. His voice was calm, yet it carried an edge that silenced the crowd. "My wife does not need your approval. She has more dignity and strength than anyone in this room, and that is precisely why she stands beside me." The socialite faltered, her smile vanishing. The crowd murmured, surprised by his defense. For the first time in public, Alexander had chosen her openly. Emily's heart skipped a beat, the warmth of his words sinking deep into her chest. On the way home, she looked at him, her voice quiet but steady. "Why did you say that?" Alexander's gaze remained on the dark road ahead. "Because it was true," he answered simply. That night, Emily stood by the window of her bedroom, staring out at the city lights. Her heart felt strangely light, as though a new door had opened between them. She could no longer deny the shift. The man she had once seen only as a captor, a deceiver, was slowly becoming something more. And though Alexander remained guarded, the truth could not be hidden. Her kindness was breaking through his walls, brick by brick, leaving him vulnerable in a way he had not been for years. As the storm clouds drifted away and the night settled into quiet, Emily knew one thing with certainty. The boundaries of their contract marriage were beginning to blur. Something deeper, fragile yet undeniable, was taking root in the space between them. The fragile warmth that had begun to form between Emily and Alexander did not go unnoticed by the world outside. In fact, it became fuel for even harsher scrutiny. The more Alexander appeared by her side in public, the more the media sought to tear her apart. It began with articles in glossy magazines. Headlines screamed accusations. The small-town girl who trapped a billionaire. A gold digger's fairy tale. Photographs of Emily leaving charity events or stepping out of the Sterling mansion were plastered everywhere. Every detail of her past, every debt her family owed, every struggle she had endured, was dragged into the light and twisted into something shameful. One afternoon, as Emily walked through the city streets after visiting her brother at the hospital, she heard laughter behind her. Two women pointed and whispered. "That is her," one said. "She married him for the money. Look at her clothes. She cannot hide what she really is." The sting of their words pierced her heart, but she forced herself to keep walking, her chin lifted high. Still, the whispers followed her like shadows. The cruelty escalated at a high-profile charity gala weeks later. The room was filled with powerful families, business magnates, and reporters hungry for scandal. Emily entered on Alexander's arm, her gown elegant, her posture graceful. But as they moved through the crowd, the snide comments began again, louder this time. "She was nothing before him. She is a disgrace to the Sterling name. Does he not see what she is?" Emily's hands trembled around her clutch, but she forced a smile, determined not to let them see her break. Then, a former flame of Alexander's, a woman named Veronica, stepped forward. Her voice was sweet, but her words were poison. "Alexander," Veronica said, her eyes sliding toward Emily. "It is such a shame. A man like you, settling for this." The crowd chuckled cruelly. Emily felt her chest tighten, every eye in the room cutting into her. For a moment, she prayed Alexander would step forward, silence them all, prove that she was not alone. But he did not. He remained at her side, silent, his jaw clenched, his gaze fixed ahead. The humiliation was unbearable. Emily's throat burned, her vision blurred with unshed tears. She wanted to scream, to run, to disappear. Instead, she took a steady breath and forced her voice to remain calm. "You may mock me all you wish," she said, her words clear enough for the crowd to hear. "But dignity is not bought with wealth, nor destroyed by cruelty. It is carried within." The room fell into uneasy silence. Some looked away, ashamed. Others scoffed. Alexander remained still, offering her no rescue. That night, as they returned to the mansion, Emily sat in silence, her heart breaking. She had defended him, cared for him, even begun to trust him. Yet when she needed his strength, he had left her to stand alone. And though Alexander's silence hid a storm within him, Emily could not see it. All she felt was betrayal, a wound deeper than any insult spoken in that glittering hall. The fragile bond they had built was now cracking under the weight of the world's scorn. The morning after the gala, the Sterling mansion felt colder than ever. Emily sat by the tall windows of her room, staring out at the gardens that stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Her chest still ached with humiliation from the night before. She had stood alone under the sharp gaze of society, mocked and belittled, while her husband remained silent. When Alexander entered the room, his expression was unreadable, as always. But Emily's patience had worn thin. "You let them humiliate me," she said, her voice trembling with restrained anger. "You stood there and said nothing. Was my dignity not worth defending?" Alexander's jaw tightened. He approached her slowly, his tone low and controlled. "The world will never stop judging. If you cannot endure their words, you will not survive in this family." Emily's eyes filled with tears, though her voice sharpened with defiance. "I did not marry into this family for survival. I married because I had no choice. But I will not be treated like a pawn in your games, Alexander. I will not be a mask for your secrets." Her words hit him harder than she realized. For years, Alexander had built walls around himself, hiding a truth even his closest allies did not know. But her defiance, her pain, pierced through those walls. Later that week, the secret he had guarded so fiercely was forced into the light. It happened on a rain-soaked evening. Emily was walking across the courtyard of the mansion when a car sped recklessly toward her. She froze, blinded by the headlights, her breath catching in terror. In the next heartbeat, Alexander was there. He rushed forward, pulling her into his arms and dragging her out of harm's way. When the car screeched away into the night, Emily found herself staring at the impossible. Alexander was standing, strong and steady, his arms wrapped protectively around her. The wheelchair that had been his public shield was nowhere in sight. Her voice shook as she whispered, "You can walk. You have been able to this entire time." Alexander released her slowly, his eyes dark with conflict. "Yes," he admitted. "I can walk. The accident left scars, but not the ones people believe. I let the world think I was paralyzed because it gave me an advantage. No one suspects a man they pity. It kept my enemies at bay." Emily stepped back, her heart pounding. "You let me believe a lie. You let me marry you thinking you were broken, when in truth you were testing me. You humiliated me, all while hiding behind a deception." His voice rose, sharp with frustration. "Do you think it is easy to live under constant attack? To be surrounded by people who want to use you, betray you, destroy you? I needed to know if you were different." Tears burned in Emily's eyes. "And what if I am? What if I cared for you, trusted you, even when the world mocked me? You let me fall while you watched in silence. That is not protection, Alexander. That is cruelty." For the first time, his mask cracked. Pain flashed across his face, raw and unguarded. But Emily no longer cared. The wound inside her was too deep. She tore the wedding ring from her finger and placed it on the table between them. This marriage was a contract, and tonight, I see it for what it really is. A cage built on lies. Her footsteps echoed through the halls as she walked away, leaving Alexander standing alone, the storm raging outside, mirroring the chaos within him. In that moment, the empire he had built, the control he had fought to maintain, felt meaningless. For the first time in years, Alexander Sterling was not the powerful billionaire or the untouchable heir. He was simply a man, abandoned by the one woman who had dared to see him as human. Days turned into weeks after Emily walked out of Alexander's chamber, leaving the ring behind. The Sterling mansion, once filled with the faint warmth of her presence, sank back into silence. Alexander wandered its halls alone, carrying the echo of her words like chains. Emily returned to her family's modest home, where the peeling paint on the walls and the creak of the wooden floors greeted her with both comfort and sorrow. She poured her energy into caring for her brother, who was still fighting illness. Every day she cooked, cleaned, and worked late hours at a small cafe to help cover what expenses remained. Life was difficult, but it was honest. And yet, even in the quiet of her small bedroom, Alexander haunted her thoughts. His deception had broken her trust, but her heart betrayed her, reminding her of the moments when he had shown glimpses of vulnerability, of strength wrapped in pain. Meanwhile, Alexander buried himself in work at the Sterling Group. His board of directors praised his sharp strategies. His rivals feared his ruthless moves. But none of it filled the emptiness gnawing at him. At night, he found himself staring at the empty side of his bed, recalling the way Emily had looked at him when she placed the ring on the table and walked away. One evening, unable to resist any longer, Alexander went to see her. He arrived at the small cafe just as Emily was closing. She froze when she saw him standing at the door, the glow of the street lamp casting his tall figure into shadow. "You should not be here," she said quietly, her voice laced with both hurt and exhaustion. "I had to see you," Alexander replied, his tone softer than she had ever heard. "I cannot erase the lies, Emily, but I cannot erase what I feel either." Her chest tightened, torn between anger and longing. "Feelings mean nothing without truth, Alexander. You built this marriage on deception. How do you expect me to believe in anything now?" He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Because I am trying to change. You showed me what honesty looks like. You showed me what it means to stand for someone, and I cannot let you go without fighting for that." Emily turned away, gripping the keys in her hand until they pressed into her palm. "You say these things now, but where were you when I needed you? Where was your voice when they mocked me, when they tore me apart in front of the world?" His voice cracked, the mask gone. "I was a coward. I thought strength meant silence, that it meant watching you endure. But I was wrong. Strength is standing beside you, not above you, and I am ready to prove that." The words stirred something deep within her, though the wound had not yet healed. Emily's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Prove it then, not with promises, with actions." She locked the cafe door and walked past him, her steps steady, though her heart trembled. Alexander watched her leave, the night air cold against his skin, but for the first time he felt a spark of hope. Because even in her rejection, Emily had not turned her back completely. She had left him with a chance to fight for the only thing that truly mattered. The weeks that followed tested both Emily and Alexander in ways neither had anticipated. Though Emily had returned to her quiet routine, the storm surrounding her name had not faded. The press continued to hunt her, publishing half-truths and fabrications, twisting her life into a spectacle. One morning, while serving coffee at the cafe, Emily noticed a group of strangers sitting at the corner table. Their eyes followed her every move. Later, she discovered their photographs of her plastered across tabloids with cruel headlines. "The runaway bride of the Sterling heir. Proof of betrayal in a broken marriage." Emily's stomach churned with dread. She knew this was more than gossip. Someone was feeding the flames deliberately. Meanwhile, at the Sterling Group, Alexander faced pressure of his own. A rival businessman, Richard, the very cousin who had mocked Emily before, presented fabricated evidence, suggesting that Emily had schemed to marry Alexander in order to siphon money from the family fortune. The board of directors demanded answers. Shareholders whispered of scandal. Late one evening, Alexander stormed into Richard's office, slamming the folder of false evidence onto the desk. "You orchestrated this," he growled. "You targeted her because you knew she was my weakness." Richard's smirk was merciless. "She does not belong in our world, Alexander, and I will make sure she drags you down with her." The next day, a new headline spread like wildfire. Emily Harper, accused of fraud. Though the accusations were false, the damage was devastating. Her cafe shifts were disrupted by reporters at the door. Neighbors who once smiled now turned their backs. Emily's resolve began to crack. One night, exhausted and overwhelmed, she sat in her bedroom and whispered to herself, "Maybe this is what he wanted all along, to break me until nothing is left." But Alexander knew the truth. He arrived at her family's home under cover of darkness, finding her in tears. For the first time, his voice carried not control but desperation. "Emily, listen to me. This is not your fault. Richard wants to destroy us both. But I will not let him win." She looked at him through tear-stained eyes. "And why should I believe you now? You kept secrets from me. You watched while I was humiliated. How am I supposed to trust that you will fight for me this time?" He dropped to his knees, his voice raw. "Because I have nothing left without you. You asked me to prove it with actions. This is my choice. I am going to expose Richard. even if it costs me everything." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She saw no mask in his eyes now, no cold calculation, only sincerity, fierce and unyielding. And in that fragile moment, she realized the battle was no longer hers alone. For the first time, Alexander was ready to stand beside her, not as a contract husband, but as a man who had finally chosen love over power. The showdown came swiftly. At the next Sterling Group board meeting, Alexander entered the room with Emily at his side. The board members shifted uncomfortably, whispers rippling as reporters waited just outside the doors. On the long table lay the folder of evidence Richard had planted. Alexander's voice cut through the tension. "These documents are forged. And I can prove it." With steady hands, he revealed bank records and testimonies from loyal staff that exposed Richard's scheme. Photographs, dates, and signatures unraveled the lies one by one. Gasps echoed through the room as the truth emerged. Richard's face drained of color. "You cannot do this," he stammered. "I already have," Alexander replied coldly. "You tried to destroy my wife's name to seize power. But today, your ambition ends." Security escorted Richard out, his protests drowned by the weight of his downfall. The board fell silent, no one daring to challenge Alexander's authority. Then Alexander did something no one expected. He turned not to the board, but to the cameras now invited into the room. His voice was firm, his gaze unwavering. "My name has carried power and wealth, but none of it matters without honor. The woman standing beside me, Emily Harper Sterling, has endured cruelty, slander, and betrayal, all because of me. I failed her when she needed me most. But today, I stand before you not as a billionaire, not as an heir, but as a husband who chooses truth. I love her, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it." Emily's breath caught as the world seemed to still. The cameras flashed, reporters scribbled furiously, but all she saw was the man before her, stripped of pretense, offering her everything she had once begged him for: authenticity. Tears welled in her eyes as Alexander reached for her hand. "Emily," he whispered, audible to the room and to millions watching live, "will you stay with me? Not because of a contract, but because you believe we can start again?" Her heart trembled. Memories of pain and betrayal still lingered, but stronger than those were the moments of care, the glimpses of the man who had finally chosen love over fear. She nodded slowly, her voice breaking yet resolute. "Yes, Alexander. But this time, it has to be real." Applause erupted, not only from the cameras flashing wildly but from a few board members who could not help but be moved. For once, the world was not sneering. It was witnessing a story of redemption. That evening, back at the Sterling mansion, Emily stood once more before the table where she had left her wedding ring weeks ago. Alexander picked it up gently, his hands trembling. He slid it onto her finger again, but this time it was not a symbol of power or a cage of duty. It was a vow renewed in truth. Outside, the storm clouds parted, revealing a sky washed in gold. Emily leaned into Alexander's embrace, the weight of fear finally lifting. The contract marriage that began as a cage had broken apart. What remained was love, rebuilt from the ashes of lies, bound not by obligation but by choice. And in that choice, Emily found her dignity restored. And Alexander found the one thing his wealth could never buy: redemption through love.